a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, now available in the liquor store near you, you lucky folks. I'm John Pohlads of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of the Athletic.
Anything to talk about this week, John?
How many hours have we already spent talking about this, Aaron Gleeman?
Well, yeah, on and off recording, probably roughly 100 or so. The Twins made, I'm going to call it a fire sale. John doesn't necessarily agree completely.
Yeah.
You coming over the dark side and you're ready to call it a fire sale?
I'll call it a fire sale. I won't call it a complete teardown, but yeah, it's certainly a bullpen teardown. I believe as dramatic a fire sale as, or a trade deadline as any franchise has ever had, I think.
I believe this is the most players ever traded within like 48 hours of the deadline by a single team ever, like literally ever. They traded 11 guys, 10 major leaguers, plus Randy Dobnak as some salary. We're going to go through those. Like John hinted at, we've already sort of done about 4 episodes about this over on the Patreon side, patreon.com/Gleeman, with our kind of initial more emotional reactions. Maybe not to say this show won't be emotional too, it will be. But you know, we kind
certainly more detailed reactions.
Yeah, we went kind of trade by trade, prospect by prospect, all that stuff. But we're gonna talk. I mean, there's just so much to talk about, especially now that they've resumed play and they had to backfill like 50 spots on the roster. And boy, it's I'm not gonna say it's a good time for Twins fandom. It's definitely an interesting time. I think it's sort of a frustrating and I don't know, dark time right now. And I think the looming questions about not only the rest of this season is going to be ugly. You're playing with
so ugly
a AAA roster, except for maybe 8 guys or something like that at this point. But I think the looming questions about 2026, 2027, and then also bigger picture questions about the ownership situation and the front office situation and all of that has been, to me at least, magnified by
payroll for 2025, 2026.
Just everything. Yep. And it's, I don't know, it presents a big picture that is a lot to talk about, not all of it very good, at least in the short term. But it also wasn't fun. We had this on The Athletic. I saw ESPN had one. I saw Baseball. The Twins are on all these kind of trade deadline winners or losers lists. And I'm not saying those are the most meaningful things ever. Certainly, I've in my past years been a part of it, and it's just subjective opinion. But boy, the Twins are in the loser category of pretty much all those. And I saw ESPN listed the number 1 loser of the trade deadline as Minnesota Twins fans.
Right? Yeah,
and I thought, boy, what a time to be alive. I also, they're trying to do a little bit of damage control, which I understand. Derek Falvey appeared on the television and radio broadcasts from Cleveland and answered questions, and then he also sent out, or someone sent out and put his name on, who knows, a letter to season ticket holders, which I'm going to be charitable and describe it as tone deaf. I also thought, is this AI written? It seemed just overall very strangely worded, but also just sort of empty, which, we talked to Falvey on a Zoom with the rest of the media right after the deadline, and he didn't say a whole lot different or a whole lot more meat to it. But even by their standards, I thought that letter they sent out was pretty, I don't know what the upside is to that, really.
I think they are feeling about as overwhelmed as the fans are. I think the Twins organization is feeling about as overwhelmed as the fans are in terms of how to digest what happened. I'm not sure they weren't overwhelmed in the moment, to be honest with you, with the last couple trades that kind of went down on.
Right. So
especially the last one. But
so just to kind of recap, obviously everyone kind of knows what happens, but they did what we expected at the beginning.
4.5. 4.5 was the over/under, Aaron.
Yeah, they kind of doubled that up. Yeah.
Should have hammered that over.
They traded 5 of the 6 impending free agents, which we expected. I think we definitely expected 4. Ty France was sort of tossed into the Louis Varland deal with Toronto. So that became 5. The only impending free agent that they didn't trade out of 6 was Christian Vasquez, who is owed like $4 million for the rest of the season and is, even by backup catcher standards, hitting pretty poorly. So that wasn't a surprise. The returns in those trades, the 4, France was just kind of tossed into Varland. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if he was tossed in mostly to just, not have to DFA him, basically, and he can be a pinch hitter for the Blue Jays or something because they have Vladdy Guerrero Jr. at first base. But the 4, Coulomb, Bader, Paddock, and Castro, which we were all but certain they were going to trade, and they should have traded because they're not going to be back next season as impending free agents. Those returns I would describe as somewhere between kind of run-of-the-mill and, maybe a little underwhelming, but there was nothing, I thought, noteworthy about those returns. Like, they were kind of what you would expect from 2-month rentals. I thought, the Coulomb one was particularly light, but, within the spectrum of what we would have kind of expected for 2 months of a decent lefty reliever. I thought the Castro deal was a little light, and we're going to talk more about some of this stuff, but they got 2 kind of pitching prospects that are just low upside guys. I thought the Bader return was pretty decent on that front. Just sort of check the box of what you would get for a good backup outfielder, center fielder for 2 months, and then the Paddock deal, which they ended up shedding about $4.5 million in salary for. They got a 19-year-old catching prospect who's a decent prospect. So nothing about those trades, and those are the ones everyone saw coming for a month, impending free agents. Collectively, individually, kind of what I expected. I thought a little bit underwhelming, but nothing that really stood out of like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Those were just sort of, fill in the blanks, color by numbers. This is what we thought they would do. Beyond that is where it got, to me, a little bit weird. I mean, they dumped Carlos Correa for literally nothing in return, and beyond that, had to pay $33 million to the Houston Astros to take back one of the most beloved players in Houston Astros history. They received essentially nothing in return. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And that in itself is shocking, although that sort of emerged about 2 or 3 days out from the deadline. Bob Nightingale reported on it. Dan Hayes and Chandler Rome for The Athletic reported on it. We actually talked about it on 2 episodes before it happened.
Right.
So by that point, it wasn't a shock. But I mean, stepping back from it a little bit,
it was literally the day before it was the morning before the deadline that we saw. I mean, the Wednesday. The deadline was Thursday afternoon. It was Wednesday morning that we got any whiff that this was happening. We happened to be doing a podcast when the news came out that was a potential possibility. So we talked about it briefly there. Then we ended up talking about it a lot on this when we did a second Patreon podcast the same day, right?
I guess in my mind, it was like this came out several episodes before the deadline. But the fact is, like you just said, and this is the reason to sign up for the Patreon podcast, we just actually did 2 episodes per day, basically 2 different times leading up to the deadline. So that in itself is a shocker, and we're going to talk clearly a lot about that. But then even beyond the Correa thing, you mentioned at the very beginning, they essentially dismantled the entire bullpen. They traded their 5 top relief pitchers, including, some really heavy artillery guys. Johan Duran, Griffin Jacks, Louis Varland, Brock Stewart, and then the aforementioned Danny Coulomb was the 5th. I've never seen that before, and I'm certain that's never happened, that big of a cut where you took a pretty good bullpen with some very good high-level guys. Like I'd put the top 5 of the Twins bullpen pretty much up against any bullpen as of a week ago, let's say.
Right.
And they traded all of it.
And all of them under team control past this year, except for Coulomb.
Right. And that's
the bigger thing.
Part of the shock, too, is, Duran, Jax, and Brock Stewart each had 2 additional seasons beyond this one under team control via the arbitration process. And then Louis Varland, who that one, to me, was by far the biggest shocker of the whole thing. And it was actually the last deal to come in right at the deadline or right after the deadline. People were aware of it. He's under team control through 2030 and won't even be past minimum salary for another year after this one. Right. And so the combination of that, and they ended up trading a total of 5 players, Correa and then the relievers that we just talked about, who have at least 2 or more additional seasons of team control. Correa had 3, Louis Varland had 5, and it's that part, that The impending free agents didn't surprise me one bit, and I don't think there's anything remarkable about what they got for them. But then once you clear that off the plate and you start to eat the rest of it, there was just so much weirdness and unexpectedness. And then ultimately, weirdness and unexpectedness, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think we both, in the moment when we recorded a show on the Patreon side, basically like 2 hours after the deadline or 3 hours after the deadline, whatever it was, and then even having a couple of days to let it settle and think about it more and talk to more people about it and read up on some of the prospects and everything like that, I still feel the same way, which is ultimately setting aside the shock of it and the rebuild versus retool and the fire sale and how bad the baseball is going to be for the next 2 months. I just don't think they got enough value back in the majority of the non-impending free agent trades.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of view it the same way. I basically take the trades in three parts, right? I've got the impending free agent trades, I've got the Carlos Correa trade, and I've got the relievers under team control trades, right? As a whole, the impending free agent trades, I've got no problem with. The Correa trade, I actually have no problem with, and I actually kind of think they did fairly well, given what they got getting out from underneath that. Provided, and we talked about this literally that night, that we don't see further cuts in payroll. That money that was freed up actually is used for to at least sustain the $130 million payroll budget that they've got so far.
The Stone Arch Bridge, John, just reopened, and I'm looking to sell it to you if you believe they're going to reinvest this money. Now, maybe the team is sold, which we're going to talk about later too.
That's right. We'll also talk about that.
Maybe the team is sold. God, please let the team be sold. In which case, all bets are off on that front, like the reinvestment front, the payroll front. But if this were to stick with the Pohlads, I just have no faith. I'm not willing to be naive enough at this point to be that. I agree with you. If they do reinvest that money, then yeah, it's a reasonable.
And from Falvey's point of view, one way or the other, if it does get sold, great, because he's still freed up an extra $20 million a year that way to work with. So,
well, you could also phrase that slightly differently, which is they're now paying $10 million per year of what has roughly been $130 million payroll in recent years, just to not have their starting shortstop.
Oh, listen, I mean, there is a
because they got nothing in return. They literally got nothing in return.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, we'll talk a little to the point where it almost feels like Houston was trolling them. Where the general manager was like, literally, what's the worst? Who can I send back that is going to make it clear to their fans?
You joke about that, and I think maybe there was an element from the Twins side or just the league side where they wanted it to look like an actual quote unquote trade as opposed to just the pure salary dump, which it was. But I don't think it's a stretch to say the Twins received the literal least valuable player in the entire Houston Astros organization. They received a 26-year-old lefty who's at high A and has a 7 ERA there. And wait, there's more. He was signed as a street free agent to a minor league deal 2 months ago. Right, if you just lined up the Astros from best to worst, 175 guys or however many guys are in their organization at this point, I don't think it's a stretch to say poor Matt Mikulski, who will be a trivia question and probably a point of joking on this podcast for the rest of our lives, at least. I don't think it's a stretch to say he might be the worst one. And so that's what the Twins, quote unquote, received.
I when I saw it, and the more I've kind of heard about how much of this happened at sort of the Houston ownership level, it feels like this deal was driven more by Houston ownership than Houston general manager, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why I'm like, I don't think of that. Listen, it's frustrating because it's definitely acknowledging how that contract either was a mistake from the beginning, which I think it was, but just because of his performance, but also a mistake because it was made before the payroll cuts came and so on. So much money was tied into it was. There's no way to view it as this trade now as a success unless you anticipate the sunk cost and understand the concept of sunk cost, right? But I get the feeling that trade was driven so much by ownership that Houston Astros GM was just like, I gotta throw some sort of code out there to just say how opposed to this trade I am doing. Who's going to look even embarrassing on the press release? which it did.
I don't think that looks embarrassing for Houston. I think this looks embarrassing for the Twins. I mean, I think
exactly
a lot
Well,
of
that's
this,
what I'm saying. He's trying to embarrass the Twins.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, it does sound like the Houston owner basically called Joe Pohlad or maybe Jim Pohlad, who knows, and pushed this along a little bit after the front office has talked about it. When we first heard word of this, I don't know, 30 hours before the deadline or whatever it was, when we were doing our morning podcast the day before, whatever, you focused on the Pohladian aspect and the money saving aspect, which I think proved accurate, that once they saw the ability to slash payroll for the next 3.5 years, they would jump at it. And you were absolutely right about that. I looked at it more from the Correa standpoint, particularly after I had a chance to talk to Correa later that day. And he confirmed that he told them he would waive his no trade only to go to Houston, nowhere else. Well, once I heard that, I said it was like the movie Inception. You plant that in someone's brain and you just let it grow. And even in one day, there's no way in my mind, and I think this proved accurate, from a human standpoint, and I am human, despite what you mentioned. Once you plant,
this is why we had to do video to prove the fact that Aaron was human.
Yeah, we can AI person just like, see, this isn't a real person. Would a robot have this hairline? No, I don't think so. Anyway, I think once you plant that seed in Correa's brain of I can jump ship from a sinking team, and there's no way to describe the Twins at this point, especially as anything other than a sinking team, to a team that has basically made the playoffs every year for, I don't know, a decade and has one of the best records in the league this year now. And I can go back home. I have family there. I have friends there. They still have a house there. His wife is from there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once you plant that seed in his head, he's just going to spend from that point until the trade deadline thinking about it. And he's not going to come to the conclusion of that doesn't sound appealing. And I think that's ultimately what happened. And the two sides worked out the money aspect. We kind of heard midway through that process that Houston had asked not only for like $50 million or more in cash. Basically, they wanted the Twins to cover half of the $104 million that Correa was still owed by that point. It was like $12 million this year and about 100 and something for the next 3 years total. But they wanted the Twins reportedly to toss in a hitter, a major league hitter, which I kind of tried to, connect the dots there. To me, it's got to be like Willie Castro, Trevor Larnach, somebody along those lines.
Right.
And the Twins rightfully, in my opinion, said, no, that's crazy. Like, we're not even saving that much money at that point. Why are we doing that? But they just kind of slid the money around and they settled on essentially 1/3 of the contract instead of half of the contract. They removed any other element of value coming from the Twins to Houston, and then they settled on Matt Mikulski as the just kind of here you go, take this guy so it can look like a trade rather than a pure salary dump. But and I agree with you in the sense I don't think the Twins did particularly well there, and I also think.
But would you have made that trade if you were Falvey?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, we don't know the inner workings, and like I said with Correa, once that seed is planted, is he going to be a happy customer going forward if you don't make that trade? Once he knew it was on the table, once he knew, I mean, he did know the terms. He was basically part of the negotiations at that point. I think what is the clubhouse dynamic with Carlos Correa for the next 3 years after this, or even the rest of this year? You could revisit in the offseason, let's say. I don't know what the situation would have turned into. So I think it's one of those where if you get halfway in that and you've looped the player in, you've looped the agents in, you've looped the owners in, you kind of just got to, jump and go. And I suspect Houston felt that from their point of view and from a leverage standpoint, and just kind of said, no, we're not sending you anything back in return. And no, we're not taking on the full contract. You got to send us, basically $10 million in each of the next 3 seasons. I don't know. I don't think it was a horrible move, but I also, yes, it's a sunk cost in the sense that you can't undo the contract. And I do agree with what you're saying, and we've talked about this over the last couple of years, that in retrospect, the signing itself doesn't look like a sound decision. It was 6 years, $200 million. He's been injured, ineffective for too long, or too big a portion of that contract. Although he's been first half of last season, he was excellent. 2023 playoffs, he was excellent. All that, but generally speaking, he's not going to be worth 200. I mean, the Twins end up paying what, 140 million, 135, 140 million for like maybe $80 million worth of on-field value from Carlos Correa. I didn't crunch the numbers completely on that. So I think it's a failure in that sense, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a decent risk to take, obviously. But then to your point, I think what really made it become untenable from a team building standpoint was he was signed with the idea that the Twins would have an average payroll, which right now, if they had an average payroll, it would be 30 million higher. Well, he's making roughly $30 million a year. And unfortunately, ownership pulled the rug out from under them after 2023, after that deal was signed, months after that deal was signed, and said, oh, we're no longer going to have an average payroll. We're going to have a bottom third payroll. And that basically meant 30 million, 25, 30 million, something like that, less money to spend. And that effectively turns Correa's contract into a quarter of the new lower payroll. And that, combined with his injuries and his performance, just made it a very difficult situation. So yes, it was ownership kind of stripping the payroll down, which then magnifies the limitations that come with a $30 million player, but also that $30 million player rarely played didn't play like a $30 million player consistently enough. And that hurt too. But so I agree with you in the sense that if we're lining up every trade they made, and they made like 10 of them, in terms of how much I disliked them or how much I don't see the logic in them, Correa is definitely not at the top of the list. I don't think it's a great trade by any means, and I think it's difficult to detach it completely from the contract and the payroll situation and the ownership situation and all that, all the things that kind of led to this point where we're sitting here saying, kind of debating whether it was a quote-unquote smart move to pay $33 million for a team to just take Carlos Correa. I think you've done some bad things, and you've made and things have gone poorly in general on multiple fronts. If you're getting to the point where you're paying someone $10 million a year to take your best player, or who should have been your best player. But I think the trades that came after that, because that came hours before the deadline, honestly.
Yes.
I think the trades that came after that were the ones that I just was totally scratching my head on and like, really? The timing of it and the returns of them and just the overall teardown aspect.
That gets to the third piece. Like we talked about the impending free agent, we talked about Correa, and then I said, let's dive into the relievers, and especially the relievers that were under team control for multiple years. But before we do that, let's talk about our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. They've been known forever. I assure you, the owners of Black Stack Brewing have been wringing their hands about the Twins for the last few days. They are huge Twins fans. They're also huge Gleeman and the Geek fans, and and they are probably diving into their award-winning beers at this point. That includes the local 755 New England IPA and the Slopes French Pilsner, the Pohlads Pale Ale. They can do that at their local tap room, which is on 94 and 280. But even more so, now it's available everywhere, and that is good news because that's what Black Stack is known for. Some breweries are known for, their events, and some are known for their tap rooms, and I mean they do that stuff too. But what Black Stack is known for is their beer, and the problem is that their beer wasn't available everywhere. But now it is, because they've got a new distributor, so you can find it everywhere, all over the state of Minnesota, from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. So if you just go into your local liquor store, look for those distinctive cans from Black Stack Brewing. Stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store.
Okay, so let's dive back into this. So really the only, and this is why I call it a fire sale, but the only healthy sort of tradable players, because like we said, they clearly would have traded Vasquez. That wasn't going to happen. But also, Buxton's on the IL and has a no trade clause. He's not tradable. Pablo Lopez on the IL for the last 2+ months. He's technically tradable, but you're never going to get the value you need for Pablo Lopez. Well, he's been sidelined by an arm injury. Bailey Ober at that point was on the IL and had been terrible the month before. You're never going to be able to trade him. So the only players that were like, veteran players that they could have traded, and they didn't, Joe Ryan, and there was a lot of indication that they were close to trading him, or at least actively discussing trades with him, with the Red Sox, with some other teams. They ultimately didn't, and that's fine. But, okay, Joe Ryan didn't get traded. Ryan Jeffers, who has one more year of team control after this one, didn't get traded. And then Trevor Larnach didn't get traded. You could maybe include Royce Lewis in that group, although I think from a value standpoint, his value is so low that you wouldn't, and also he's got 3 years of team, whatever. those are really the only guys on the team, veteran players, that they didn't trade. And so the only healthy tradable guys. And so that's what really makes me think this is actually even a bigger fire sale teardown element, because it's not just that they traded 10 guys. It's that they really only had like 14 or 15 tradable assets. Look, you could have traded like a Brooks Lee or something like that, but I mean, he's young and he's minimum salary and all that. You're going to build around him. I just mean from a veteran standpoint, they basically traded 10 out of the 14 that they could have traded. And there's indications that they were willing to trade Joe Ryan also, or they were working.
Well, that's true. There definitely were indications that they were listening on Joe Ryan, because I think they were getting some good offers on Joe Ryan. But they also did limit it. Like, all of these players under multiple years of team control are bullpen. And we talked a lot about this.
Yes. Can I just interject one thing on that?
Sure.
That is true. And I have no problem, generally speaking, and I know you agree, with getting value for relievers. However, I will put one halt to that. What hitters could they have traded? All their hitters stink this year. Mm-hmm. And so I think, yes, you can say, oh, they didn't really touch the lineup that much, although they did trade Carlos Correa, by the way. But I don't know that was so much an approach as versus like, who are the good performing commodities with all the relievers? Sure. Who are they going to trade from the lineup that wouldn't be selling extremely low or injured or whatever? It's like, yes, you can say, oh, they didn't touch the lineup. They only worked from the bullpen. Two things. One, they dealt the whole damn bullpen. They blew the whole thing up. And as we're about to see over the next 2 months, there's nothing left in this bullpen. And you can talk all you want about they believe that they can, develop new good relievers. They did it with Jax. They do it with Brock Stewart. They did it to some extent with Duran after he was injured as a starter. They certainly did it with Louis Varland this year. I believe they can do that. I just don't believe they can do that 5 times by next season. It's more of a one guy per year type of thing. And so what you're left with is a bullpen that's just doing like open tryouts for 2026 now. But then beyond that, I'm not going to give them credit for only trading from the bullpen when most of the hitting assets, and for that matter, most of the rotation assets, with Lopez and Ober being injured or ineffective, they didn't have other sort of good performing, healthy assets to trade other than the bullpen.
Yeah, but I'm also not going to suggest, I'm sure they would have traded those guys if they would. I mean, first of all, they didn't trade Jeffers. Jeffers could have absolutely been an asset that they could have traded this offseason, right? I don't know how much of an asset Larnach is. They didn't trade Ryan. They did keep it to the bullpen, and they certainly had offers out there for Ryan. We know that for sure. I'm sure they had offers for Jeffers. Finding a good hitting catcher is a priority of the trade deadline.
I was told there wasn't a whole lot of steam on Jeffers. They were open to trading him, and I think I would guess Jeffers kind of expected to be traded.
Right.
I was told they weren't going to get a ton for Jeffers. Now, that's subjective. Obviously, I don't know what the specific offers were or anything. Because, I mean, catchers are valuable. He's a good hitting catcher, but I would say below average defensive catcher. And also, unlike some of the relievers, he's only under team control for one more year after this one, and he's probably going to make $8 or $10 million next year. So I think his value was a little bit muted. But I think in general, and I also am going to say this, which Twins fans aren't going to like to hear. I'm of the belief that if ownership does not change before the offseason, and by the way, there are some indications that this thing is close or closer than it has been for a while now on the sale front. But we've been saying that at various times over the last 10 months. So I'm just going to kind of go business as usual until we're shown otherwise. But I have a legitimate fear, I guess, that once this season is over, they're going to trade Joe Ryan, and assuming Pablo Lopez has shown himself to be healthy down the stretch, they're probably also going to trade Pablo Lopez. I'm not predicting that. I'm in terms of sources telling me that's their plan, but I just connecting the dots here. I think they were close enough to trading Joe Ryan that they will revisit that in the offseason. And then also it was impossible to trade Pablo Lopez, but he's making $21 million this year, and he's going to make that same number the next 2 years. And their payroll right now is, what'd you say, effectively $95 million if you include all the arbitration guys.
That's right. Before the trade, and we crunched some numbers. First of all, they saved $25 million this year based on the trades that
immediate savings, basically.
Immediate
over the next 2
savings
months.
just off this year's payroll. And then if you take a look at the 2026, instead of their payroll lining up, sort of their baseline payroll, which isn't guaranteed money, it's basically those guys that they're going to keep and about what they're going to make in arbitration. Like if you're going to make just business decisions 101, here's the guys you're going to keep. It was something about 125 to 130 before the trade deadline, and it's now about 90 to 95 after the trade deadline.
Right.
So
I just
they
think
saved themselves
looking at
$35 million in the future.
From a financial context, I just think they're gonna trade those guys too. Now, again, all bets are off if a new ownership comes in and does whatever. I think one of the things that's interesting about the sheer volume of trades they made, from a number of trades, but also just the quality of players they traded. When you do that many deals and you send out 10 players in basically 2 days, it almost takes away from kind of the individual deals themselves. Like, look, we spent time breaking down each individual deal. We talked about all the prospects on the Patreon side. We're not going to do that today. Go sign up for Patreon and listen to that. But I guess what I mean is, what does it really matter deep down what the Paddock trade was specifically, or the Varland trade specifically, or the Jax trade? Like, yes, it does matter. 5 years from now, we can look back and evaluate each one of those moves, and we can particularly evaluate the impending free agent trades versus some of the more shocking trades and see, like, were the shocking ones, did they end up much worse? Right. But ultimately, you're looking at a pile of players you sent out and a pile of players you brought in. And what's the difference kind of individually, how that happened? And that's why I kind of look at it once the dust settles over the last day or two, and now especially, where I look at it and I just go, all right, they traded away 11 guys. They got 13 guys back. I'm not arguing like the 13 are worse than the 11. I mean, that's how it works. Prospects are always going to be less valuable in the moment. But it almost wipes away the meaning behind each individual trade, which isn't that fun. It's fun to talk about.
Right. No, I agree.
Did they get over on this team, or did that team get over on them? But I'm looking at it more like, what's the difference? This was all clearly kind of part of a interconnected decision tree for them. Like, once we do this, we do this. Once we do that, once we start to blow up the bullpen, let's just go and blow the whole thing up. Once we part ways with Correa, there's kind of no going back at this point from a fire sale tear down standpoint, all that. And so, yeah, I weirdly, it makes me less inclined to look at the individual trades and more inclined to just look at the collective comings and goings. And I just don't think the comings were that great. And this also goes with something that I talked about quite a bit on various podcasts leading up to this, which is I just had a lot of consternation or worry about sort of enabling this front office, particularly in the current environment with the ownership situation and the payroll and the future of the team and all that, to make these big sweeping decisions and trade away not only key players, but key players who are going to be here next year or would have been here next year, 2027. In the case of Varland, would have been here for 5 more years. I had a lot of kind of mixed feelings on not should they be allowed to do that. I mean, look, if you're running the team, you're allowed to do whatever, but did it put them in a weird spot? And also, like I said, I want whoever's shopping for the groceries to cook the meal. And I'm not sure this front office is going to be around to cook the meal. And what played out is basically what I was worried about. What I was scared of is they made massive sweeping moves. And whether or not you like them or not, they have huge long-term ramifications. I mean, dumping Carlos Correa is a 3.5-year decision. Dumping Louis Varland is trading Louis Varland is a 5-year decision. Jackson, Duran, and Stewart could have been part of a very good bullpen. That trio just alone, or that, add in Louis Varland, that's a good bullpen for 3 more years or 2 more years after this. So they removed not only from this year's team, not only from next year's team, but from 2027, 2028, even through 2030 with Varland. And my worry coming in, and I guess it kind of came to fruition, was, are they going to make such sweeping moves that, like, even if there is a new owner, they come in and they go, well, hell, you don't have a bullpen. You traded away Carlos Correa. Yeah, you got the payroll in a situation where if we want to add, we can sort of start from a not quite scratch, but a clean slate. That is maybe a positive element. But also and we're going to see this down the stretch over the next 2 months, I just don't think there's a good team here. Like, and all of Falvey's comments to us on the Zoom or to fans in the letter that he sent out, or the kind of spin that he's attempting to do when he does other various media interviews and stuff, and we are going to request him for the podcast. I'm sure he'll turn it down, but we'll see. They've all been kind of under the guise of, well, yeah, I know this looks bad, or I know this looks harsh, but I think we can still be good next year. And yeah, you point to Joe Ryan, you point to Lopez, you point to Buxton and all that. They do have some good players, but the depth has just been absolutely gutted. And particularly, how can you be a good team with no bullpen? And it's not like they're going to go out and sign a bunch of good relievers. Like, they're going to try to develop internally. They're going to try to turn some young starters into relievers and all that. And I'm not saying by the end of next season or 2027, they might not have the makings of a decent bullpen, or at least three pieces, let's say, that are pretty good. They're not going to be anywhere near as good as Duran, Jax, Varland, Stewart, and with Coulomb in there. And also, they might just have a terrible bullpen next year, in which case they haven't really, added to the offense. They've removed now Correa from the offense. And so I just have a hard time. And like I said, I fear there's going to be more cuts coming here once the offseason starts. I just have a hard time buying into the notion of, hey, yeah, we traded a bunch of guys, but there's still a winning core here. But also, we've been saying that for 2 years. Like, if this is a winning core, like the front office seems to insist, why isn't winning?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this about the winning core piece, and then I want to go back to the trades themselves. There wasn't anything that you could. I mean, the winning core offensively was supposed to be Buxton, Correa, Wallner, Lewis. Like, that was supposed to be the four guys that were supposed to carry, along with being supplemented by Julian stepping forward and Miranda stepping forward, and all the things that went terribly, terribly wrong. It's sort of the lower half of that lineup.
Larnach
supposed to make
not
its way
stepping.
Larnach stagnating at the very least, right? And yeah, we're going to see August and September is going to be so ugly. We've got what, three of the top four players on this team out right now. We got Buxton out, right? You've got Castro traded, Bader, who was an offensive, contributor at the very least, traded away. And yeah, now you get to see that core, which is Wallner, Lewis, oddly enough, Cody Clemens, suddenly seems to be, but I mean, the fact that this reminds me of September of 2021, where you've got Nick Gordon batting fourth. Like, that is where we're going to be right now for the next 2 months. So it's going to be real hard to take a look at that and say, oh, they've got a good hitting lineup core. Now, I would hope that some of the money that they saved or the payroll flexibility that they got is going to be used towards, we got to get like a first baseman that can hit and a DH that makes sense, that we're not just flopping around. But back to the trades, and your point of like kind of looking them as a group. The only problem with that is that, certainly they can't look at those trades as a group. They had to make individual decisions on each of those trades. And of the trades, I agree with you overall. I'm not happy with the value that they got in the 10 trades that they got. But really, it comes down to like 2 or 3 that bothered me. And unfortunately, those are all in the bullpen reliever, bullpen with multiple control box, or the vast majority of the ones where I'm disappointed are sort of like the relievers with multiple years control. The trade at the end of the literal last minute trade of Varland, like literally last minute. Like, I think that news came in after 5 o'clock.
Right.
I mean, unless you are really, you've got a much higher opinion about Alan Roden than I do, or you are really excited about the AA pitcher. Was it Morales or Kendry? I don't know. I forget his name.
Never stopped
doing Morales. I know it's Kendry Morales, but
Kendry Rojas.
Kendry Rojas. That's it.
Yeah.
That's a hard trade to justify. I thought the Brock Stewart trade for Outman. I don't get that. The Taj Bradley thing, I guess I can see Jax for Taj Bradley, which was the other last minute trade. I mean, I guess it depends where you line up on Taj Bradley. I don't know exactly. I think I don't think there's a middle ground on Taj Bradley from what I'm seeing in terms of evaluation of that. If you either love Taj Bradley or you don't think anything of Taj Bradley. And depending which way you are, that's the way that trade goes.
Yeah, I mean, Taj Bradley was, if they'd have acquired Taj Bradley in the middle of the 2023 season, he was a consensus top 50, maybe even top 30 prospect. But he's thrown 350 innings in the majors since then with a 4.70 ERA. I mean, he's very good stuff. He's certainly capable of being a mid-rotation starter, maybe even a number 2 starter. But if the Rays can't get that out of you in a pitcher-friendly ballpark with a great defense and maybe the best organization in terms of developing pitching, can the Twins get that out of you? I think a lot of them, and the Jacks for Bradley one is a perfect example. After all these trades, I reached out to every scout I know. I reached out to every front office person I know. I reached out to, a lot of people who write for a living about prospects, that sort of thing. I just wanted to get as many, kind of wisdom of crowds type approach to this thing. The Jacks for Bradley one is a perfect example of kind of the overall feedback that I got on all these trades collectively and individually, which is a lot of people went, okay, I can kind of see why they like Bradley as a kind of post-hype prospect, still only 24, team controlled for a long time, still cheap. The stuff is there. If you think you can get him back to anywhere near a level from about 2 years ago when everyone thought he had like number 1 starter potential, absolutely. I get it. It's a value play. It's a guy who's ready for the majors, all that. But the reaction was, as a 1-for-1 for Griffin for 2.5 seasons at Griffin Jacks, who's a frontline reliever, like a kind of bounce back bet 24-year-old former prospect is what you got. Like it really was a straight up deal. And the Outman for Stewart one is an even bigger example to the point. I wonder if something happened with Brock Stewart's medicals, which I'm certain the MRIs of his arm are not pretty. And I wonder if that was a situation where they were going to get more. This is just pure speculation. And
I haven't seen any reporting on this, and I wondered the same thing when it came.
But there was also
because it took so long for them to announce it, right?
Right. There was typically what happens is, at 12:15, it's the Twins are trading so and so to this team, and then at 12:18, it's here's the guys they're getting back.
Right.
This was at 12:15, the Twins are trading Brock Stewart to the Dodgers, and then 2 hours later, it's a 1-for-1. Actually, the initial reports were James Outman is part of the return going to Minnesota. And then like 45 minutes after that, it's like, oh, no, actually, it's a 1-for-1 trade. It just seems odd, and I get that the injuries and the durability are a part of Brock Stewart's value. And I'm not suggesting he was anywhere near as valuable as Jax or Duran or Varlin or anything like that. But he's a good setup, man. He's going to pitch like the 7th or 8th inning for the reigning champions at this point with 2 more years of team control. And you got a 28-year-old outfielder who the Dodgers like stopped playing because he couldn't stop striking out over the last 2 years. That one just seemed like a really weird.
Another one who was really valuable in 2023, but has faded since. Right?
And the reaction to that was very similar, which is like I can definitely see. A handful of people got back to me. I can see Outman being a 4th outfielder. He's got legit speed. He can play center. If they can get him back on track a little offensively, he strikes out a lot, but he's got some power. He's crushed AAA. He can definitely like replace Bader as the 4th outfielder, although he's a left-handed hitter, so it's less of a fit there. But it was like. That he was it, like that's the trade. Like he wasn't like the second guy in a Brock Stewart trade or something like that.
Right.
And so I think a lot of it was you can kind of see the logic, and like even Rodin is sort of a post-hype prospect, and he's been called up to the Twins already. Where a year ago at this time he had crushed AAA, and it was like, ooh, this guy's really an interesting player. But he made the Blue Jays opening day roster this season as a rookie.
Yep.
And then he struggled in like 45, 50 games, and they demoted him back to AAA. And I'm not saying that's a death sentence, that he can't become a good player and a good hitter for the Twins. I probably think he will be a pretty good, sort of Trevor Larnach-esque with a little bit more speed, maybe something like that. But it's a bounce back bet. It's a buy low bet, and that's fine. I do think they like Kendry Rojas quite a bit, and that was he is the one guy that I will say that the feedback I got from front office and scouting types made me, because I just didn't know that much about him.
Yep.
I'd heard of him, but I didn't know that much about him. He was an ascending prospect, 22-year-old lefty who's now at AAA in the Blue Jays system. So I just looked at it and I thought, a lot of places have him ranked, 7th, 8th, 10th in the Blue Jay system. And that's just kind of my initial opinion on him was based on that. And I had a lot of scouts, multiple scouts and one front office guy for a different team not involved in the trade say, this guy could be a little bit underrated. Like this guy could be 6 months from now viewed as a much better prospect, but he's also had some injury issues. But to that I say, well, yeah, he damn well better have some upside because you just traded 5 years of Louis Varland, who has shown this year that he's definitely a front end, or I should say a back end reliever. And so a lot of it individually kind of had the same MO to it in terms of who they were targeting and what they got return. And the thoughts on it were like, we get the logic, but it seems like one player short of a good return, or the guys that were in the 1-for-1s, it should have been a 2-for-1 with that guy being part of it or something like that. But
of the 10 trades, like you say, it's hard to look at them individually. I've got no problem with about 7 of those trades, but there's a couple there at the end that I've got some real questions about. The number one is the Brock Stewart one. That's the one that I just have trouble getting past. But again, I guess that depends on how you view Outman. And like you said, it almost feels like there was something weird going on in there. But most of the might have been a little bit light on some of the impending free agent ones. You mentioned the Castro one. Okay, yeah, but those are 2-month rentals.
But here's what I'm going to get.
Go ahead.
I agree that like each one seems a half step or a step light. And if you go trade by trade and you go, is this the most egregious trade I've ever seen? No, it's not a horrendous trade. But I guess my point is if you make 10 trades and they're all a half step light, and there isn't, by the way, this is maybe the most damning thing in my mind. Can you point to one trade where you went, wow, the Twins did great there? No. And that's the problem to me is like, I don't feel like there was a single trade where you went, ooh, they really pulled one off there. And there should be one of those if you make 10 trades. And so if everyone or, 6 out of the 10 seem like that just is a little lacking, and there isn't one that you can point to and go, I love that trade to kind of make up for that deficit, then I think you come out the other end and look at it collectively, like I've been saying, and go, it just feels like they got, 85 cents on the dollar for 10 different guys, basically. Something like that. I think I also just think from a bigger picture standpoint, 21 months ago, they were winning a playoff series.
Right.
And just think about what went into the entire thing going off the rails and the plummeting on the field, the payroll being slashed off the field, the lack of acquisitions, the now fire sale trading off 10 guys, the paying Houston $33 million to just take Carlos Correa, the ownership situation that's now been 10 months without a sale, basically. Like every step along the way over the course of 21 months, that playoff series win over Toronto, we were there. It feels like it was 50 years ago. Yeah. Like it almost doesn't even feel like it was like a dream, basically. Like every step along the way has been the unraveling of that vibe, of that sort of notion that something good has happened and we can build from this. And they've just brick by brick taken out until the whole thing is collapsing. And I think it's embarrassing. I think it's pathetic. I think it does all stem from ownership, but I think the front office is complicit to some regard, just in some of the decision making and some of the choices that they've made. I certainly think that the players are complicit in this. We've talked about endless hitters, especially where they just stop producing. And I certainly think Baldelli's complicit in it to some. I mean, there's no shortage of blame to be spread around here, and it's not a one size fits all. But I cannot get over the fact that 21 months ago, Target Field was rocking. There was a euphoria. There was a legitimate optimism on and off the field. They snapped a 2-decade losing streak. They had a young core of players. They seemingly had an ownership that for the first time in 3 generations was at least willing to spend at an average level. And they were signing Correa. They were re-signing. They were spending. They were extending Buxton. They were trading for and extending Lopez. And then the rug gets pulled out. The payroll gets slashed. Now all of a sudden Correa's taken up a quarter of the payroll. You can't do any deadline deals for the next 2 years. You don't do anything over the next 2 off seasons. You go into a stasis, really. The young core collapses. The vibes are wrecked. And then you end up at this point, at this trade deadline, less than 2 years later, and you're selling off half the team. You're paying people to take Carlos Correa. You're gutting the whole bullpen. You're trading away dudes who you could have built the bullpen around for the next 2, or in Varland's case, 5 years. And at the end of it, we're supposed to believe 2026, they're still going to compete. How? With this team I don't even know was going to compete as is. Now you've gutted the whole bullpen. And we're supposed to believe in another, retooling or resetting, as Falvey phrased it. He very clearly tried to avoid saying a rebuild. And I see that, but I think there's more coming unless this team is sold. And I really have gotten to a point now where it just seems very dark and very helpless from a fan base perspective, except for one thing: if the team is sold. And short of that, I just don't see morale or the on-field product or the vibes or whatever it is dramatically improving anytime soon unless this thing is sold. And I've always felt that way, but after this trade deadline, I mean, there's no hiding from that fact. Is like, this is in a real bad place right now. I personally fear it's going to get even worse, not only on the field, but in terms of trading away assets. And the only thing that's going to stop that, in my mind, is if the Pohlads are no longer involved. And
yeah, well, I think you get a nice job of kind of giving voice to the primary reaction to this, which is this is the culmination of 2 years of making decisions that kneecapped a franchise that was on the rise. Right? This is the way this was going to go. Once the Pohlads decided to quit investing in a team that was on an upcycle, then invariably you stall and invariably you start to go to a down cycle, and this is where the down cycle ends. Now, on the one hand, from a general manager standpoint or from a CEO of baseball operations standpoint, I respect them for being able to saying the Band-Aid is time to rip it off. This is in fact, we need to make some changes, and we don't necessarily need to blow up everything. We don't need to trade Joe Ryan for pennies on the dollar here or something, but we're gonna make some major changes. And in particular, the Correa trade is a recognition that this team is not in the cycle that they were from 2019 through 2023. They are in a different cycle right now, and they've got to find a different way to go forward. We talked a little bit about, we talked for the last 3 months. What do they do to shake up the core? Well, trading Correa is shaking up the core.
Yes, now, but here's the problem. They didn't bring in core hitters. They didn't bring in anybody.
Yeah, but you can't do that at a trade deadline sale thing. I mean,
I think that's BS. You trade Johan Duran, Griffin Jacks, and Louis Varland, and you bring in not a single hitter other than maybe Alan Roden, who could be like an okay corner outfielder. They chose the players they chose. You cannot sit here and tell me they couldn't have gotten a 25-year-old hitter to plug into the lineup for Duran or Jackson. I'm not saying that would have been a better trade, but those avenues are open to them, and that's one of the problems I have with the just general idea, even before the trade deadline, of, well, what do you want the front office to do? They've been, like you said, kneecapped by the ownership. Well, yes, nobody has talked more about the kneecapping or the limitations or the degree of difficulty that trickles down from an ownership situation that is just absolute garbage and a slash payroll. But there are still decisions that the front office has made and could have made at this deadline and this offseason. They could have traded away core players before some of these guys have essentially died on the vine. They could have shaken up the core. They could have made decisions that did not require money. And they could have done that at this deadline too. Now, they chose the players they did, and that's fine. But I just have a hard time acting like this is just a retooling. Because what does 2026 look like? Like, what, you have no bullpen whatsoever. You have a pretty good starting rotation in terms of frontline guys and depth, but I think they're going to trade some of those guys, or I fear they're going to trade some of those guys. And you got the same lineup, except it's missing Carlos Correa, Willie Castro, and Harrison Bader. And like, guys like Julian, guys like Miranda are no longer even in their plans. I'm certain they do have some prospects, Luke Keeschel, Emmanuel Rodriguez, etc. But I mean, we've seen counting on those guys to provide some a prospect right away. They have the same problem offensively, except they no longer have Carlos Correa or Willie Castro. They've turned a strength of the bullpen into an absolute just gaping hole of a weakness. And yeah, the rotation's good unless they trade Ryan and Lopez, in which case it's just very young and unproven at that point. I don't know. We should talk about our last couple sponsors here. The first one is Raycon. I was actually using these the other day. The idea with the Raycon is wireless earbuds. Work as well or better than some of the bigger brands, have a better battery life. John uses them to go running, so the fit in your actual ear is better. And for a doofus like me, super easy to connect them to Bluetooth every time. Super easy. The ease of use is smooth and a much lower price point. And even better, our listeners can go to buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman, and they'll take 20% off the fan favorite Everyday Earbuds Classic, which they sent us a sample of these. These are new, and like I said, I was wearing them a couple. Actually, I wore them on the Zoom with Derek Falvey.
Oh, cool!
And they worked very well. And you can get 20% off right now. Raycon is offering that 20% off discount on their Everyday Earbuds Classic. You just go to buyraycon.com/Gleeman. That's buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman. Get some new wireless earbuds. Save. Good battery, easy to use, feel good in your ear. You can have the exact vibes as me giving side eye to Derek Falvey and he explained his thought process on that Zoom. And our last sponsor of the day,
Hims.
is
Hims.
Hims.
If you don't want to go the route I've chosen here, which is just basically kind of shaving my head, you might want to just investigate Hims. You might not be ready for that right now. Because Hims is just a low obstacle way for you to investigate what you want to do to trying to bring back more hair. They've got a lot of different possible solutions, whether that is spray or pills or everything else, and it's easy enough to be able to check things out. They're doctor trusted, clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil can stop hair loss and regrow hair in as little as 6 months. You can start it from the comfort of your home. You just fill out an intake form, and a medical provider will determine if the treatment is right for you. And if prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you for free, and the process is 100% online, which means getting started has never been more convenient. And you don't even necessarily need insurance. It's no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Okay, and treatments can start as just like $30, $35 a month. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Gleeman. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/Gleeman. Individual results may vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription required. See website for full details, restrictions, and important safety information.
Okay, so let's jump in. Let's try to hit a few things kind of rapid fire here before we finish up. So I also just came away from this. I saw Byron Buxton's comments. He did a media scrum from Cleveland, from the clubhouse in Cleveland yesterday. And he continues to steadfastly say and do all the right things about his loyalty to the Twins and his desire to stay here, which he has stated at the All-Star game going back years. And he basically said, this is the ugly business side of this thing. I don't love it. My family just lost friends. I lost friends. It may not be pretty, but he said, I think his exact quote was, I ain't going nowhere. And I'm sure some people will take that as something to criticize with Byron Buxton, but I find myself, consider myself a pretty loyal person, sometimes to a fault. And I get where he's coming from. I was drafted. I was developed by this team. I've made my life in Minnesota with this team. This is my baseball family, and I'm ride or die. And, but I do kind of feel bad for him because I feel like there's a Will Smith from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air meme where he walks in and it's just an empty living room and he goes, that's what I feel like Buxton is in this clubhouse right now. I think a couple other things about we'll hit a bunch of stuff here, but to finish up, there's Falvey, I thought when asked, and I asked him a couple of real specific questions, kind of to me danced around the payroll topic and whether this was driven by ownership. And I think it's undeniable that this was driven by ownership, whether directly as like a mandate, maybe not, but just, reading the room, like he knows what the situation is. They know that if they can unload this contract, like you said, they shed roughly $25 million immediately, roughly $40 million off of next year's, not guaranteed salaries, but likely commitments. I do think there's more coming in the offseason, which could take that number down even further. Maybe not. There's no way to view just the last 40 years of Pohlad moves, the team being for sale, the slashing of payroll that's gone over the last 2 years. To me, I mean, you can just say what's in front of your face at that point. And so I think that is definitely needs to be factored into this. But ultimately, you made the moves that you made, and when it's a situation like this, I feel like what we've said is, some of these trades I wouldn't have made from the standpoint of who's leaving, or the timing of it, at least with someone like Varland, let's say. But also, we're focused a lot on what's coming back, and that's what seems short to me. And that doesn't cost anything. You know what I mean? Like, they've chosen these bounce back candidate buy low guys like Bradley or Rodin or Outman. They've chosen some of these post type prospects. They chose to load up on starting pitchers, which I understand. That makes sense. Maybe some of them will become relievers, but they've also chosen to load up on Rodin and Outman, who are left-handed hitting outfielders, of which they have approximately 10,000 of them already. Yesterday's lineup, because they called Rodin up right away, had Rodin, Wallner, and Larnach in it. That's like speaking of memes, that's like the Superman meme where the guy's just looking at himself. Spider-Man. I haven't seen either of them. I haven't watched those. But I feel like, okay, now you just have more left-handed corner outfielders. Like, it just seems to me like a doubling down of sort of the same flawed process over and over, and none of that costs money. The incoming aspect wasn't about the money. So I just wanted to say that. I think on the Correa front, like, as more details come out, I mean, this is something we could do shows on 6 months from now, 10 years from now. Like, there's an element to this that is very intriguing to me, of just, it's almost like a guy leaving a marriage, going off with someone new, figuring out that the grass isn't always greener, and then, getting a text from their ex and saying, what if we could figure out a way for you to come back? And it's like, okay, I'll come back. And, I don't fault Correa for that. I think it wasn't for a lack of effort that his time with the Twins is going to be looked at as a failure. I mean, first of all, they snapped the 20-year playoff losing streak largely because of his performance in those playoffs. Yeah. But beyond that, I mean, the heel injuries were debilitating to him for 2 years, either in terms of hurting his performance or just keeping him off the field for most of the second half of last year. And then this year, he just hasn't seemed right to me at all. I mean, we talked about that basically since spring training, and it just never really, to me, clicked from a visual standpoint. It wasn't for a lack of effort, but that's the danger of signing a guy to a 6-year, $200 million deal and kind of watching him age. Not everyone ages exactly as the chart said they should age.
Well, and when you sign somebody to that level of contract, you don't necessarily expect that contract to be a good investment. You know what I mean? A lot of teams sign a superstar with big money and go, like, we're certainly not going to get the money out of this on the back end.
Right, but they didn't even get to the front end. They didn't even complete.
They didn't get money on the front end. But in general, when you're
I'm not saying like that. I'm saying we haven't even seen half of the contract. Right. Like, he played 2.5 out of 6 years. Like, this was supposed to be the good part of the contract. Yes. And it's similar to the Donaldson situation, which is the second biggest free agent contract the Twins have handed out. Also handed out by Falvey. Also ended roughly halfway through, and also ended with a salary dump on a bigger, more successful market team in the Yankees. This time it was the Astros. That's part of the thing that just seems pathetic to me. It's like, oh, isn't that cute? The little Minnesota Twins went out and signed Josh Donaldson. They went out and signed Carlos Correa. And then 2 years into it, they realized, oh, we've made a terrible mistake. We actually don't have much money to spend. These guys have aged worse than we thought. Let's call up one of the big market teams who can just kind of absorb this and take this guy on. And maybe they'll give us something. Maybe they won't, but we'll be out of it. Like, I have a hard time giving from the situation that was created, the present day as of the deadline. Did they do something maybe positive in shedding, 70% of the Correa contract? Maybe, but I have a hard time. And you can look at the Donaldson deal the same way. Did that end up relatively clean in terms of breakups? They got back not that much, but they didn't have to pay anybody to take his contract and all that. But also, I just have a hard time looking at both those situations and not thinking about the entire process that those happened and how disappointing both of those were, how much excitement there was at the beginning of both of those, not just from a fan base, but from the front office and the players, how poorly it went, like almost immediately. And then you don't even get halfway through the deal and you're just trying to get rid of it. You're trying to reset it. And I just, at this point, like it just seems sad to me, like to be the team that is in that situation. Twice in 50 years, they actually went out and got a big time free agent, and both times they couldn't even get halfway through the deal before they were like, oh, we can't do this anymore. And it just seems pathetic to me, embarrassing a little bit. But let's hit, I guess, I don't know. We talked about, again, if you want specific scouting reports about the prospects they received and more, 15, 20-minute discussions about specific deals, go to the Patreon. We did a 2-hour show immediately after the deadline. We also did an hour and a half the day before that after the Duran trade to Philly. Yep. We broke this down.
We broke down the Paddock trade. We broke down the Duran trade. We broke down the Correa trade before it happened, and actually ended up getting the terms of it pretty close to what ended up happening. And then, we did immediately 2-hour podcast almost right after the trade deadline to walk through each of these trades line by line, individual by individual. And we'd love you to check that out.
In retrospect, looking at the trades individually or collectively, like I said, I think that the Duran trade, which was Duran to the Phillies for 2 prospects, one of which is an 18-year-old catcher named Eduardo Tait, and the other is a 23-year-old starting pitcher named Mick Abel, who you'll probably see, I would guess, in September for the Twins. He's been optioned to AAA. They optioned everybody to AAA or everybody to the minors except for Rodin, but I suspect you'll see several of these guys pretty soon, if not, maybe in September for sure. That trade, which I didn't love, but I think even in the moment, and we didn't know what was going to come after. This was the first, I guess Paddock was the first shoe to drop. Then Duran was the first shocker or big trade. And so we were just evaluating it in that context. We didn't know Correa was going to be moved. We didn't know the whole bullpen was going to be blow up. And our thought that night was reasonable return. You basically got, one consensus top 100 prospect in Tait, who's 18 and a catcher, so there's some risk element there for sure. And then one kind of borderline top 100 prospect who's ready for the majors and had pitched a little for the Phillies actually in Abel. I think our take on that was similar, which is it's reasonable value for 2.5 years of Duran, but it to me, to make that move, I wanted to be blown away. And that was the case then as other moves unfolded, which is like, I want to be blown away by a couple of these because there was no ticking clock on Duran. There was no ticking clock on Jax. There was definitely no ticking clock on Varland. And they clearly felt this was a situation where if we deal them now, all these teams are hungry for relief pitching at the deadline. There's a premium that teams do pay at the deadline. We get 2.5 years of control, which is only going to shrink, obviously, if you hold on to them. You avoid any injury element. You avoid any I get all that. But but
you got to see the premium when it comes back, right?
I don't think at the end of it, I don't think that equation spit out an answer that was the premium.
I will say this: when the Duran trade went down, I thought to myself, I'm not as excited about this as I thought I was going to be, but also I don't know these guys that well, the guys that they got back in return. And I wonder if as I get to understand a little bit more about what their upside is and so on, if I will end up liking this trade a little bit more. That's why we talked a little bit about like I'm not sure where these guys rank that we got back in terms of like overall Twins prospects. Would Tait end up 4th overall in the Twins system? I think probably that's about where he is right now. And objectively, like if you take a look at national rankings, they basically got back to, top 10 guys, maybe even top, one top 100 guy and maybe one guy just outside the top 100. And that is good value. And what has happened since then is that has proven to be true. I'm more excited about both of those players than I was when the trade happened 3-4 days later. But I'm not sure if it's because I got to know them better and like had room to get excited about them, or if it's because I looked at what else they got and just became more excited about the first two.
What I was getting at bringing them up, and I agree, is that one kind of stood the test of time. And the time was 30 hours or whatever. But that one to me looked as good or maybe slightly better after the dust settles as it did the second it was made, which is to say it's solid value. Like it is good value. It is, you got 100 cents on the dollar for Duran. Now I would have wanted more than that or different than that, but every subsequent move was not 100 cents on the dollar collectively, let's say. Yeah. And so then you look back at that one and you go, well, they started on the right foot. Sort of like they started with a move that was maybe a B- move or a C+ move. And then every move after that was like, okay.
I mean, honestly, if you kind of go through them by timeline, go through them chronologically, the earlier the trade, the more I liked it.
But that's probably always going to be the case, right?
Well, I mean,
because for them to pull the trigger on Duran,
well, that's probably true.
A day plus before the deal, or for them to deal Paddock even, which was a lower wattage move, they're going to have to believe that letting it play out wasn't going to lead to a bigger return. You know what I mean?
And it was the last two trades that I think struck the fan base the hardest. I think I think most people have a problem with the Jax one and the Varland one. When we were on a Twins Daily Live, literally 5 minutes before the trade deadline, we're like, okay, well, they've made a lot of moves, but they've hit the bullpen pretty heavily. Like they traded away Duran and they traded away Stewart. And I don't like the Stewart trade, and we don't have Coulomb anymore, but at least we've got Jax and Varland to hold down the bullpen, and that's not a bad core to start around. And then both of those trades happened in the last 5 minutes. I honestly wonder if this whole trade deadline would have been viewed in a different lens without those last two trades.
Oh, I can tell you I would view it. I still don't think if the Jax deal and especially the Varland deal don't happen, I don't think they
still traded away 7 guys, by the way.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But I mean, to your point, you just make Jax the closer and Varland's the setup guy, and Cole Sands pitches the 7th, and at least you still have some semblance of a major league caliber bullpen there, not only for the rest of this season, which doesn't matter much, but for 2026, 2027, and who knows, 28, 29, Varland might be the closer at that point. I think I still would have been somewhat underwhelmed by the collective return, and I still would have had kind of mixed feelings about the Correa salary dump in general, which we've discussed. But yeah, it was the last two deals that I just went, what was what was the pressing need to do that and get that in return? And look, they like Rojas. They think he's going to be good.
Right.
I've had some scouts tell me that's very possible.
And Bradley, obviously. Right.
And obviously they think they can get Bradley back to a point where he's a frontline starter, and Rodin, I think, can be a 3 or 4 year contributor as a left fielder, something like that. But I want to be blown away by some of these, and I'm not.
Well, and it doesn't help that they fell those last two trades were because they were really high on 2 pitchers again. Like this over and over and over with this organization, it seems like I do feel like they understand the pitching part. Like they seem to get that. I don't feel like they have any grasp for the hitting part. Like the further we get, and frankly, the more we're going to watch baseball in August and September, with what they've got left from the hitting standpoint, that there is for lack of a better word, a bias on pitching in this organization, which makes sense. Like that's why, they reached out to Falvey in the first place. Pitching was sort of his thing, etc. And you saw it in sort of like, we've got to make a quick decision. What do we make a decision on with Jackson or Varland? Well, I really like Bradley and I really like Rojas. If in either of those deals they'd have gotten back a comparable hitter, somebody would be like, oh, this guy can be really good. The hitting equivalent of Bradley or the hitting equivalent of Rojas, I might be a little more excited about it. But
I mean, is their pitching development that good? You can certainly make individual cases for that. Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, some of these bullpen guys that they've turned into real assets, but their pitching staff is below average this year. It was below average last year. Other than 2023, it's been average or worse pretty much every season. And this ain't year 3. This is year 8 or year 9, I guess. Year 8 of this front office. Like, you look at it collectively or year by year, other than 2023 when they had Sonny Gray and Pablo Lopez at the top and a pretty good bullpen, and a lot of things went right, this feels almost like wish fulfillment to act as if they're good at developing pitching. I agree that they've been, in recent years, they've been much better at developing pitching, or the results pitching-wise have been much less bad than hitting-wise. Right. But they've had mediocre pitching staffs like 4 of the last 5 years. Like, and it's not like Zebby and Festa have taken some big step forward. They've been injured and mediocre. Now they have no bullpen. Like, I just, again, I'll go back. Same thing I've been saying. Emperor's new clothes. We all want to believe. And I think, especially compared to the collapse of all hitting, you look at the pitching and you go, well, that's been much better. It has. It hasn't been good. I mean, let's be honest. For all the talk about how good this bullpen is, and all my consternation about the guys they've traded away, the bullpen was at the point of the trade deadline below average in both ERA and WPA, and that's the case for like 3 of the last 4 years. I just more and more it's difficult to point to a thing or to grab hold of a thing and say the Minnesota Twins are really good at this. And I think pitching definitely are they better at pitching lately than hitting? Well, yeah. I mean, everyone's better than the Twins at hitting lately. They got a like 640 OPS, and every 26-year-old guy in the organization's hitting 190. Like that has completely collapsed. Whereas the pitching has just been sort of mediocre. But I had no problem with, I guess, going after more starting pitching. I mean, just sight unseen. I'd want to go after shortstops, center fielders, and starting
Sure.
pitchers, right? I mean, shortstops and center fielders can fill other positions as they mature, and starting pitchers can either be starting pitchers, which are hugely important and always will be, or they can be relievers. And I think some of these guys are going to end up being part of the rebuild of the bullpen for sure. I don't have as much. I get what you're saying. I don't, getting a million left-handed hitting outfielders, I think is probably a little silly, but I also personally don't expect Larnach to be on this team next year. So he basically just gets replaced by Rodin, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just finish.
They do seem to value their left-handed corner outfielders, even to the point where they didn't want to trade away Max Kepler year after year after year. They just really like their left-handed outfielders.
Yeah, okay. Let's finish with a couple things, just kind of a aftermath moving forward more, and we can be done here in a couple minutes. But like I said, the only guaranteed salaries on next year's books are Byron Buxton for $15 million and Pablo Lopez for about $21.5 million. You're also now have a $10 million effectively just blank space on next year's salary, on the 2027 salary or payroll, and the 2028 payroll, which is what you're sending Houston to cover Carlos Correa. So I guess you could view that as a salary. But it's a very unique situation to be in, even for recent Twins, which aren't known for spending, to have literally two guys signed for next year. And that's why I think maybe one of them, the one who doesn't have the no trade clause, might be on the block. It was also just, as we see these guys sort of go out into the world for new teams, I got to tell you, it was a real bummer to see Duran coming in with his full intro, which the Twins sent along to Philadelphia, all the graphics and all that stuff.
Broke my heart.
It's great for him, and I know you're sort of a quasi-Phillies fan because of Chrissy, your wife is from Philly and a big Phillies fan. So, look, I'm happy for Duran. He didn't do anything wrong. He pitched his ass off for 4 years. He's a good dude. He deserves to go close out a World Series. I'd love to see it. And
his first outing there, he got the save on 4 pitches. And I got to tell you, that's the sort of thing that Philadelphia Phillies fans are going to eat up with. They have had bullpen problems for their entire, decade. And to have to be able to go through it, and they also, they specifically stop. Usually they go to, commercial going to the 9th inning. They're like, we are not going to commercial because you need to see this. And they did the whole walk-in, the whole introduction. He comes in. The first pitch he throws is the 98-mile-per-hour splitter, and the play-by-play people are like, I've never seen that. I don't know what that is. That's a 98-mile-per-hour splitter, and then 4 pitches, and he retired the side, and everybody got to go home. It was nuts.
You know what's funny? He didn't throw a fastball. He threw 4 splinkers. 98, 7, 98, 99, basically through 4 of them. Funny. I bet there are people who don't know that much about John Duran who watched his first Phillies outing and thought, I thought this guy throws harder.
Right.
98, look, 98's fine.
Right.
But he's only throwing, maybe he's a little nervous or something. He's only throwing no, brother, that's the secondary pitch. That's the splinker. I
will say this. I hope he has as good at that. That city is going to love him, or if he fails, they're going to hate him. But he absolutely deserves that kind of entrance with they're sold out almost every game. That feeling at night that he had walking into that thing is going to be something that's going to go on and on and on. So,
yeah, I mean, most of the guys, obviously, Correa is very happy to end up back in Houston. Bader joins Duran in Philly and basically is now platooning with Max Kepler.
Yes,
which is a very interesting situation.
Yeah, he came in to hit for Kepler in that same game and ended up getting on base. Yeah.
Jax ends up with the Tampa Bay Rays, where it wouldn't surprise me if he got some closing opportunities. They're basically the number one pitching development organization ever. So it doesn't surprise me that they targeted Jax, who has like 5+ pitches and has really had his stuff skyrocket since moving to the bullpen. I bet they have some more tweaks for him to sort of view him as moldable clay. I think that's a pretty good situation for him.
Brock Stewart gets to go back to the Dodgers.
Yes,
I'm already getting text from our person who helps with our video stuff, who's a huge Cubs fan, about how much he loves Willie Castro.
Yeah, they're all in pretty good situations. The one I feel for is Byron Buxton, who's left. He's the last man standing. But the traded guy I really feel for is Louis Varland, because look, I'm not saying he's a North St. Paul kid. He went to Concordia. He grew up a Twins fan. He came up through the system. He's a developmental success story after struggling as a starter to jump to the bullpen and just have an explosive first half where he established himself to the point. By the way, if they would have Louis Varland for this exact 2-player package of Rodin and Rojas a year and a half ago, I would have said that's pretty good value for a guy who failed as a starter. Right, except now he's succeeded as a reliever to the point that I have a lot of faith in that. And they did think he was going to be a good reliever. And now you got 5 years of that. It's, shows how these things can shift. But, it's his dream to pitch for the Minnesota Twins. And I'm not saying that they're not allowed to trade local guys. Like they've done it before. They'll do it again. Someday maybe they'll trade Matt Wallner. I'm not gonna shed a tear. It's a business. That's what you get into. But I know his wife is from here. She's got a job here. He's got family here. Like it is a human element that's like, oh, that just sucks. Like, maybe if you get blown away with that trade, they get some amazing return and we just go, well, sorry, Louis, they had to do it. I'm sorry. You'll eventually love it in Canada, all that stuff. Go pitch in the playoffs, whatever. And all of that's still true. But the fact that they got a return where you're like, did they really have to do this? Then you add in that human element, and it's like, ugh. Let's see. There was one. So in terms of what's left in the bullpen, Cole Sands is now your closer, which this time last year may not have seemed so crazy, but he's taken a big step backward this year to the point that in the month leading up to the deadline, he had been used in low leverage and occasionally opener roles. Yes. Which is, kind of the bottom of the bullpen gets used like that. I do think this is a unique opportunity for him as sort of the last man standing a little bit to take on a closer role, but there isn't a whole lot of pressure to it because it's not a team competing. It's going to be a new experience for him. He also has the next 2 months to sort of try to get back closer to the version we saw last year where he was just much more dominant, much more, swing and miss, strikeout piling up, all that stuff, which he just hasn't been this year. And maybe that was a flash in the pan 1 year breakthrough or something like that. But it is a decent opportunity for him because he's probably the one guy that I look at in this bullpen now for the next 2 months that doesn't really have to fully pitch his way, doesn't really have to try out for the 2026 bullpen. I'm not saying he'll be the closer, but I think if he just has a decent next 2 months and maybe gets a little bit closer to what he was last year, they would pencil him in as a 7th inning setup man or something like that next year. The weird thing, and I almost shocked myself. I laid out the actual names here in the bullpen and I was like, how is this going to fit? I mean, we saw it already in the first 2 Cleveland games. They're using Michael Tonkin as a setup man. Yes. Justin Topa is probably the 8th inning guy at this point. Yep. He's been pitching mop up pretty much all year. Cody Funderburk now. He, by the way, still has a year left as well under team control. Yeah, well, good luck. We'll see if he's back next year. Cody Funderburk is now the number 1 lefty. You now have just sort of some spare part guys filling out the rest of it. I think probably in September we might see Marco Raya or Connor Prelip or some starter convert, maybe even someone like Taj Bradley or Mick Abel or whatever. Get a chance in the bullpen, who knows? But for now, I mean, this isn't even necessarily a good AAA bullpen at this point. I mean, we saw Tonkin wasn't that good at AAA. Funderburk wasn't that good at AAA. Some of the St. Paul Saints bullpen has not been an asset. Right. Right. Even in St. Paul, it hasn't been an asset. Right. So this is what you get when you trade your top 5 relievers, obviously. But I do wonder, what will the effect be, not just on wins and losses, which I think is going to be ugly, but they're going to maybe ask the starters to go a little bit longer because you can't bring in Danny Coulomb to get you out of a jam in the 5th, and then you can't go, Stewart, Varland, Jax, Duranda winning 1-0 game.
Well, urgency to do that isn't there anymore either. Like it's not like they're fighting, scrapping for every win here.
So it is a developmental opportunity for Simeon Woods Richardson, let's say, or guys like that. But I also just worry: are you going to ruin some good Joe Ryan starts? Is he going to, go 7, 2 runs, hand over a 3-2 lead to the bullpen, and the thing's going to implode? And what is the sort of bigger picture effect on that? I think those are some of the things worth watching. They would obviously love, beyond Sands, someone like Topa, someone like Funderburk, anybody random that they want to cycle through here to at least step forward, and you can go into the offseason going, all right, well, that's at least like one bullpen spot that we can fill, even if it's a lower leverage, medium leverage. I just don't really see that much upside. I mean, guys like Tonkin have no upside.
Right.
I've kind of given up on Funderburk. I would have liked, even in the aftermath of trading 5 relievers, if we were still looking and it was like, okay, they got Sands, they got this guy, they got that guy. There isn't just much at all unless you're a Topa believer, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see. I mean, the names that I'm more interested in now is like, what can Travis Adams do in short stints? What can Pearson Ole do in a short stint?
Those are the youngest guys,
right? And what is happening down in St. Paul with Raya? What is Connor Prelep going to be moving up to St. Paul? And for so is he going to be in a starter or a reliever role? They should, if Ober gets healthy for next year, Pablo Lopez comes back this year, Festa develops, Matthews develops. You've got Abel. You've added Abel. You've added Rojas. You've added enough other arms here,
Bradley,
that you can kind of go. We should have the same sort of optimism coming into next year that we did this year, taking a look and saying, look at all the starting prospects that you've got there. Maybe some of those starting prospects that haven't panned out, Corey Lewis, Marco Raya, etc., can be bullpen arms that they don't have to all stay on the path that they were on. I mean, frankly, there's been a lot of speculation about a few of them moving to the bullpen anyway.
Yeah,
that will be the more that drama or that strategy we're going to see play out over the next 2 months. But
I mean, I do think the next bullpen is going to be built from starters. It always is. Yes. I mean, Jax was a starter.
We will talk about that. Like, that's what we're going to be talking about, not both on a weekly basis on this free podcast, but also twice a week on the Patreon podcast as we go through the various results.
So thank you to our presenting sponsor, which is Black Stack Brewing. Yes. Thank you to our other 2 sponsors this week, which is Raycon and also Hims. Go sign up for the Patreon. You can go listen to all the reaction episodes we did. I think we did 5 in 3 days, I want to say.
Something like that, yeah.
Exclusively for the Patreon, including a 2-hour episode right after the deadline, an 1.5-hour episode reacting to the Duran deal before the deadline.
And we're going to be back literally, we think, tomorrow with a mailbag episode. So if you've got questions that you specifically want answered, like what do we think of this? What do we think of that? What's going forward, etc. We one of the things that we have with the Patreon is because we can never actually get to questions on the free one. We tried for a decade. We were never able to get to them. We started doing some all mailbag episodes on the Patreon side, and we get some great questions. It makes for entertaining. I think we're going to do one as early as tomorrow, and we'd love to have you join us over there where you can send in your questions and get them answered. So.
Yes. Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman.
Yes. Let me just give one more last thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. It's now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota, so stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew or try something new, and stop by our YouTube channel to see clips, again, of this, as well as occasionally we're throwing some clips out there from the Patreon as well, not video, but some audio clips, so you can kind of check things out. And otherwise, we will talk to you next week on the free channel, or check out patreon.com for a lot more Twin stuff.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. And welcome to the end of this video. There's lots more. For another, just click on one of these boxes.
Or click on this circle in the middle to subscribe to all of our Twins Talk.
Thank you.
Gleeman